Well, hello and welcome to this unexpected additional extra time part of today's podcast. Unexpected for you, probably, in fact, almost certainly, but unexpected for me as well, because I had a bit of a look around and somebody actually pointed me in generally the right direction in terms of some of the accusations that had been made against Rupert Lowe. And in the first part, although I didn't know it was the first part at that point in time of the podcast, I talked about, in fact, showed a clip of Rupert Lowe speaking. And the gist of part one of today's podcast was that we have to keep our eyes open. We have to not get too emotionally entrenched with any one individual or indeed party. We've got to look at people more objectively, and we've got to consider that we may be vulnerable right now. We may so want it to be a particular party or a particular individual who's going to lead us to a better, let's say, country, ultimately. A more vibrant, happier, hopeful place. And so that is in of itself aspirational. However, I think that if we're not careful, we may just reflexively jump in one direction and not go in with our eyes open enough. So what I wanted to do was to actually introduce something that you may or may not have seen on the title to this particular live. And I've said something wicked this way comes. And it is actually inspired by a phrase that was written by Rupert Lowe. And it doesn't necessarily apply to reform. I hope it doesn't, but I do believe that there is wickedness out there, and I do believe that we have to be quite careful. I've said before over the years that sometimes we can all get blindsided by the behaviors of certain individuals. And one of the reasons that we can get blindsided is because we could never believe that someone would do what they've done. We could never believe that someone might behave in a way that seems absolutely outlandish and appalling and simply, well, unbelievable to us, because some people don't work the way that most of us work. Their, let's say, sense of guilt and conscience may be a little bit different. And I'm not necessarily just talking about politicians here at all. Quick reminder, let's be hopeful. There are some good people in the mix in every party. But I do want to go back to the Rupert Lowe thing, because in part one, although again I didn't realise it was part one of today's podcast, I said, as far as I was aware, there had been a police raid, but I couldn't be certain at that point in time. And it would appear that there was. And the evidence seems to be stacking up about something that was said to Rupert Lowe, which I find particularly reprehensible. And we'll come to that. So from our slides, you'll see here, this is from the Mail. Police seize reform rebel Lowe's guns as his feud with Farage flares again. So it would seem that, yes, there was a raid, and it sounds like Rupert Lowe had guns, certainly at that point in time. And yes, of course, you are with licenses, etc. And if they're locked away in the safe and you have good reason to have them, you're allowed to have them. Although they're relatively unusual in the UK compared to some other countries. But you can have them. So you can perhaps imagine, and this is just imagining, this is just speculation, that if someone says, hey, this guy's a bit out of control, he's been saying certain things that I found frightening and threatening, and by the way, he's guns. So he has guns. So I'm just speculating. I'm not saying that's what did happen. But anyway, The explosive feud between Nigel Farage and ex-Reform MP Rupert Lowe has been reignited after the police seized his private gun collection. Officers swooped on Mr. Lowe's farm in the Cotswolds at the weekend to confiscate the guns, which he says was done in response to false statements from Reform. Now, that part, I don't know. I don't know why they swooped. It's a fair connection, I suppose, for Rupert Lowe to make, but certainly that's what he felt at that point in time. Tensions first erupted when he criticised Mr. Farage's leadership of the party in an interview with the Daily Mail last month. Now, if that's true, if that's where the tensions began, then this puts some question marks over the leadership capability of Nigel Farage. And don't get me wrong, I'm like you, that I want to find the right party. I want to find the right people, the right person to help us get out of what I think is an ever worsening crisis with the current party and the current leader. So I don't say this lightly. And also, as I've alluded to, and as I said earlier today, it is important to take a step back emotionally and look at this rationally. People fall out. Maybe this is just one of those things. Maybe this is just a flare-up, a blip in the system. However, it does look like, at least on behalf of some people, or maybe one person, to be a bit of an overreaction. So let's move on. Last little slide. Anyone who has experienced a family member suffering with dementia will know how cruel the condition is. To use that as a political weapon is pure evil. I am 67 years old and I have a 67-year-long unblemished record with the law. And in case you didn't tune into part one or don't know, it would seem that the rumour was spread that Rupert Lowe it was suggested at least that he had early onset dementia, which again, if true, it is looking like it is probably, allegedly true. That is awful. Again, it's just disgusting. It's despicable. What a thing to say. If it was said anyway, if it was true and it was said and people are spreading that around, that's just disgusting in of itself. But there is another spin on this. If it's not true and it's being used to somehow smear or belittle or demean or cheapen the credibility of someone, then this beggars belief. It really does. So we have Rupert continuing. He added, "These are false allegations designed to maliciously smear my name and ruin my reputation after I dared to bruise Farage's ego. Weaponizing the police process to silence a party colleague is unprecedented wickedness." And again, if this is true, if, as Rupert suggests, that these allegations were in some way connected to Nigel having his ego bruised, and this is a smear campaign, which I have to say it does look like, based on what I know at this point in time, then that is awful. And to use the police, if that is what has happened, is indeed wicked. That there is a wickedness in that. And once more, I think it's likely, it's probable, it's possible that most of us, all of us, have had flare-ups, have said things and done things that we regret, have literally found ourselves in a position and in a situation where later on we look back and think, oh my good gosh, what did I do? Why did I say that? How could I say that? I'm ashamed. I'm embarrassed. But if you recall, if you have been following any of these recent episodes, one of the things that I've talked about recently is in terms of trust. And one way to help regain trust, and I was speaking or alluding to at least some of the behaviours of the Labour Party, and one of the ways to help build that bridge back, again, it might not be able to be rebuilt or repaired enough that people can walk across that bridge of trust, but one of the ways to do it, if it is going to happen, is to admit that mistakes were made, and essentially to be humble, to say, yeah, I don't know everything. I'm curious to understand, and to remind ourselves, and particularly some of the people in positions of power and influence, that they don't know it all and they are not superior to anyone else. And so I think one of the big things to pay attention to with not only reform, but any of these parties, any of these leaders, is, are they admitting that they got it wrong? Are they admitting that they weren't right? Are they saying, yeah, I really mucked up there and I am extremely sorry and it won't happen again? Now, we may or may not believe them at that juncture, but at least it's a start. And generally speaking, you don't hear them say that. And so just when I read what Rupert Lowe had written and the unprecedented wickedness, and I thought, yes, because there is wickedness in the world. There are there are wicked people, and there's wickedness in some areas where people are in positions of power and influence. No doubt about it, but not everyone, I'm pleased to say. But we have to be aware of that. And I go back to our need to walk into things with our eyes open, our need to understand that because some of us at least are desperate to see some change, or desperate to see this country getting back on its feet again and people becoming happier and hopeful and moving forward. Because we're desperate for that, then it could be that we just grab on to the nearest thing that looks like a solution, the party, the leader, or the leadership team. But we've got to be more cautious, because we have to ascertain, we have to ensure that those people that we may put our trust in are up to the job. They're up to the job in terms of being virtuous, in terms of being ethical, in terms of being moral, that they care, that they have a conscience, that they can say that they screwed up, that things are transparent, that they understand they're there to serve. Because whether we like it or not, and whether what Rupert Lowe has written and claims is totally accurate, I'm not sure about that, but my guess is there'll be some truth in there somewhere, perhaps all of it. But even if it's just a little bit, then we have to just remind ourselves that there is evil out there. There are people who are wicked. And I know that can sound a little bit over the top initially, but consider what you see around the planet and consider the behaviours of some leaders that you have perhaps had the misfortune to witness the fallout from over the years. And then I don't think that what I'm saying is too outlandish. I don't think what I'm saying is hyperbole or scaremongering. I think it's common sense. I think we have to be circumspect. I think we have to proceed with caution. I think we have to expect much more from these would-be kings and queens. We have to expect, once more, I come back to, that they are decent and they understand that they are there to serve. Yes, it means making tough decisions. Yes, they may make decisions that we don't always agree with. However, I do believe that if we get the right individual and the right team in the right party, then things will pretty quickly feel different. But we've got to test it. We've got to know before they get into power. And so they must answer questions. We must find a way for them to stick to the promises that they make. And we must also find a way to stop this nonsense when politicians are asked questions and they evade it in interviews or questions in Parliament constantly. That's pathetic. It would never work anywhere else. Well, it would work in an extremely toxic and horrendous organization because that's one of the reasons it's toxic. But anywhere else, if shareholders were watching a board behaving like that, would they say, hey, that's okay? Like heck they would. There'd be sackings en masse. And so we need to find mechanisms and ways, with the agreement, of course, of the politicians, to ensure that we understand who we're getting. No more of this obfuscation, no more of the lies, no more of the broken promises. Sometimes promises can't be kept because of, yes, force majeure, essentially. Genuine force majeure, sure. But that's kind of obvious to most of us when that's the case. So beyond that, we need to understand more as we move forward. We need to find the right party, we need to find the right leadership team, and we need to find the right leader. And it is not necessarily who we would like it to be, but it has to be the right individual. Otherwise, goodness knows where we'll end up. Anyway, I better stop. You better get on with your evening. And I guess so should I. So for the moment, from me, bye for now.